Welcome everyone to this session where I'm going to share a bit on what we have learned moving the Elköp sites to Next.js and hosting them on Vercel the last couple of years, or we did a work the last year. The presentation will have sort of two parts to it. I will first talk a bit on how you can make these kind of changes in a large organization, because it was not obvious that we should do it. So how do you actually get can you sell this kind of project to a large traditional organization? Because I don't think we as developers are as good as we probably should be on doing that. And the second part is, of course, like the technical aspect on what we have learned. And most focus will, of course, be on those things and learnings from how Next.js works, and also some learnings from Vercel. So if any one of you have used any one of our sites in the Nordics the last couple of years, you might have seen something like is it your left or right? I think it's your left, yeah, left side. And it's not me that had removed the prices from the products. This was actual how the site looked like from time to time. And I think that could maybe be fine if the prices were actually streamed in a reasonable time, but most of the time you should get the prices right away, in my opinion. But this screenshot, the prices were gone as long as I had the time to actually open up the screenshot tool and take the screenshot, which took more than 30 seconds for me. And that's definitely not the experience any customer should have visiting an e-commerce site. You should see the product, and it should be snappy, and it should be fast. And I don't know about you, but my patience is not that long. So if I would experience it myself, I would actually go to another site. Unless there was some super good offers, of course. We try to have those from time to time, but not all the time. So it's not great experience. And you can also see there from at least 2 comments, but there are many more on Reddit if you really want to look into it. But one, if you translate the first one, it says something like, a horrible site, I went somewhere else. Basically what I said. And then we have the second one as, I work for Elköp, I'm as frustrated as you, basically. And it sort of hurts as a developer to actually read those comments, especially for your own company. I was not responsible for the site before this, so it was not my fault in a way, but it still hurts. I still take pride of where I work, and I want to my company to do as good as they can. And this is not good enough. That's how easy it is. So this is sort of, I'm going to share a journey of how we went from what you see on your left-hand side to what you have on the right-hand side. You don't see the site there, but this is a score from Vercel, which is based on the core web vitals, which is the thing Google used to as input for the SEO ranking. So having good core web vitals is crucial for an e-commerce site. That doesn't necessarily mean the site is excellent, because there are ways you can actually have good core web vitals but a crappy site. But at least it gives you something to work with. And just to show that this is not the trick data, this was also from the page speed insight that we're actually doing fairly well now on desktop. And before this, on the old site, we were struggling to be sort of average. Now we are pushing good all the time. This was for desktop. Mobile, we are actually not good on IMP yet, due for various reasons. I still think we have some legacy data, because this is a 28 days sliding average, and we haven't been 100% live for 28 days yet, but soon. But we'll see if we're going to make it there. But also remember, what we have live now is basically the first version what we have done. There's still more optimizations we can do. So this is a great starting point for where you want to be as an e-commerce site. You want to have good SEO scores and good user experience. So I think we succeeded on that part at least. So before moving on, a short introduction about me. My name is Tomas Jansson. I work at Elköp Nordic, as I said, as a principal software engineer. I've been there for about 4 years. And one funny thing, when I joined Elköp, I had a fellow speaker at the conference who asked me, when would you fix the site? And it took about 4 years to get there, and hopefully we can improve it even further. I wasn't hired to actually work with the site, but I ended up there eventually. I do get a bit older, I realize. I've been programming for food for 20 years now. I started up doing Perl programming in VMware in 2004, so I have a 20 years anniversary today. But I've been also through ABAP programming, SAP, super exciting stuff. Java, of course, as exciting almost. C#, F#, and all web things out there. Not all web things because that would drown me, but at least a lot of different web technologies. I try to focus as much as possible on delivering value, and I think you can deliver value in many different areas, of course. One is building the applications, but you can also deliver value of enabling teams and helping with architecture and making things be more effective in all kinds of ways. And I also really a strong believer in you need to continue to change. If you want to improve, you need to change. Of course, not all change is good, but then you just need to change again. That's how easy it is. And I don't care too much where I work, if I work with infrastructure or front-end, back-end, or whatever. As long as I feel I can have some significant impact where I'm working, I'm quite happy. And right now, that is rebuilding our site. And that's definitely been the most fun project I've been on in my career, because not every day you get to work on a site with a really small team. We are only 6 developers, I think. But to work on a site that impacts or have the customer base is all on Nordics, basically. So it's quite a large site, I would say. So how do you get to do such a rewrite in the first place? So if you didn't notice, but our old site was sort of finished about 1.5 years ago. And then I think it's quite early to start a rewrite already now. So you have to get to that decision, you have to really make a good sort of sales pitch in a way. And that's something we as developers really have to better at. And it's hard for us developers to be heard sometimes in all traditional developments because we doesn't say the right thing, I think. And I also think it's a more problem in traditional organizations because we don't sell software. We don't sell services or software services. We sell consumer goods at the Elkjøp. And a banking sells banking services or something like that. And let's face it, almost all companies we work for are more traditional. Most of us that work for Microsoft or Google, we work for banking, insurance, retailers, etc. So it could be hard sometimes to actually sell in those things. So let's see what you can do to maybe increase your chances of getting heard. At least it worked for me. So hopefully it can maybe work for you as well. First thing is, I think you should start not selling the technology itself. You should focus on the problem, or rather what's the thing you want to improve. Because technology, I understand why we would actually start talking about technology. That's quite easy for us. We know tech. We are comfortable talking about technology. We are not as good maybe on the business side of things. But we need to understand what the problem we're trying to solve, and that's just, here's another JavaScript framework that's going to solve everything. We need to have some kind of better understanding of what is it we want to solve. And really the management or shareholders, etc., they don't care about technology, on average. Of course, there may be one that does or something, but they want to have happy customers, more revenue, and lower cost. That's how easy it is. So if you want to get heard by them, you need to sell that to them. You can't sell them a new JavaScript framework. They don't care. As long as it doesn't impact what they are sort of measured on, which is most likely the stock price, they don't care. And now when we know that we should sell the problem, we also need to do the math. Just saying, oh, here was the problem we need to solve. Okay, what's the impact? And I think that's sort of the reason why the business almost as a better or stronger argument when they are presenting their solution that they want to have fixed, because they sit there in the spreadsheet and making sort of estimates on all kind of things. Like, if you're doing this thing, we're going to have this much more revenue, or if we do Y, we're going to cut down cost. And for us to be heard, we need to speak the same language. And we can get hold of the same data if we want to. You can get rough estimate. You know how many sort of developers or outsourcing partners you have, or how much time you spend on bug fixing, etc. Try to estimate how much that might cost. And then try to see, okay, how much can you maybe improve that? In this specific scenario, I was mainly actually focusing on cutting down cost for driving our e-commerce site, because that's had almost got out of hand, I would say. And we want to lower cost, but at the same time, I hopefully think that the revenue increase will be even bigger over time. It's sort of, that part is hard for us to measure, because we have sort of the macroeconomic picture to take into consideration, and that impacts sales probably more than if we have a nice looking site. But cost is something that's really tangible for us to look at. So that's what we actually focus on. Like, we're going to try to drive down cost quite a lot. And when you do this, you probably need to do some assumptions as well. That's perfectly fine. The business make assumptions all the time, because you don't know how things are going to pay out in the future. But at least give some reasonable assumptions and try at least. And you can be wrong, but that should be fine. Another important thing, I think, is to pair up with someone or a group of people when you do this. Because let's face it, most of us might be the best on the business side of things. I'm definitely not. So it's good to get someone else to sort of validate your thinking and challenge also your thinking. And in my case, I actually paired up with 3 more people, 2 more developers, where we actually could create a really early proof of concept that this can work. And then I have one more, little more business-oriented, so we could get a stronger business case, which really helps, and also validate all the numbers, and he helped gathering the data I was talking about in the previous slide. And just getting there and having these people to work with is just one part of it. But I think the most important part with that is to get your sort of first follower, I would say. Because you don't have anyone that believe in what you're trying to do and what you want to fix. How are you going to convince the management that it will work? So having these first followers is something that's crucial. And it also makes work hopefully more fun. If at least you pair up with someone you actually like working with, which I did. So we had a good time doing this. So I think that's definitely something that's crucial for anything like this to actually succeed. So now when you need to do the math, you have someone to work with, it's time for you to actually tell the world or the rest of the organization, this is what you do. Maybe not go directly to all the organization right at once. And this is also where it's good to have this other person to work with, because your network have already grown quite a lot inside the organization. So now you can find the right people to talk to and create a solid business case to present to them, and try to get the right people in the room. And if you can't get them there, it's going to be tough to actually make big changes, depending on what your organization looks like, of course. But it's important to have this presentation to point to and refer to. And if you actually can, I definitely think that having a rough proof of concept ready already, that makes things even easier for people to make a decision. And we had a rough proof of concept of sort of search and other things done in a couple of days. It doesn't have to take too much time. But yes, that made people more comfortable with all this. And also when you are trying to pitch the thing you are selling, be clear to have a plan. present the problem in a clear way and how, or the potential outcome, what you want to do. And the only thing we actually sold in this first presentation was, can we just get 2 months that we can focus on this work? It was me and 2 other developers at that time, and see what we can do. And we over-delivered, I would say, in these 2 months. So we created a lot of things, but there were a lot of things remaining. But that gave everyone the extra confidence, and it sort of validated our assumption that we could deliver, and then we could make the final commitment that we are going to go this direction. Because if you're working for a large organization, investing 2 months for 3 people, that's basically nothing for most larger organizations. Especially if we have an older one that's used to running super large project with 50, 60, 70, 100 people for years, then 3 people, 2 months is a rounding error almost. So that could be one way of selling in what we do. That's ask for a time-boxed time, and you work with those time-boxed and deliver as much as you can. Some people will come with arguments saying, oh, timing is bad. But that, I think that's sort of one of the worst arguments that there is, I would say. You have to say, why is timing bad? Because, let's face it, timing is always bad. The best thing in our case would probably been not to make the previous decision 2, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, maybe. But we can't travel back in time. So most likely, the best time of doing this is now. Worst time is probably tomorrow. So, but I agree, timing is bad, but someone just needs to make that decision and live with it. So that's also why it's important to know what you ask for, and that's why we limited it down to ask for only 2 months to begin with. This sort of concludes sort of the part of how you might be able to sell in something like this. Because it was a big change for Elkjøp. We had invested a significant amount of money in the previous site that we've been running for a couple of years, and many more developers than 6. So making this decision almost sounded too good to be true. And it's hard to make those decisions also, even though when it sounds too good to be true. But it was true. So why did we choose Next, and why might you consider doing Next? That's something I hope I will cover for the rest of the talk. And to be able to make a good decision, I try to think about, at least when it comes to web development, I can think about the applications on a spectrum of application. On one end, you have sort of fully static applications. And on the other end, you have fully dynamic applications. And with static, I basically mean a blog, or you can basically server-side render everything, make them fully static, serve everything from a CDN. That should be super fast and great experience for users. Dynamic part is like a stock trading application or online game or something like that. Maybe you shouldn't do an online game in web, depending on what you're doing, but that's more to a dynamic side of things. And to choose the right tool, you probably need to know where on this spectrum you are, because different tools have different, is catering for different parts of the spectrum. And some can be, of course, over the whole spectrum, but they are probably better in one way or another. Our previous site was actually done using Angular. I'm not going to talk too much about Angular, but my opinion about Angular is that it's definitely targeting more towards the dynamic part of a site, where you have like two-way data binding and things updating here, where you have like reactive extensions and all things happening out of sync and or not happening at all. And that's not ideal for an e-commerce site, in my opinion, because as I said, e-commerce is more like a blog than it is a game. So we would rather have something that can actually create a finished HTML for you and then just give that to the customer, rather than have this sort of dynamic page where things happening without control in a site. And to try to sort of make this or Angular or this the dynamic part work in a static way, you're sort of fighting against the framework, and that's not a place where I never want to be. because then that means you have probably chosen the wrong tool for the job. So that's why I think it's so important to know where you are in the spectrum so you can choose a tool that might work for you. I think you can make an e-commerce site with Angular. I just think that's going to be much more work than many other solutions. And one other important part here is like you should choose something that you think is fun. So if you don't think Next.js sounds fun or is fun, you should choose something else. But know where you are on the spectrum and don't choose something that doesn't fit for your purpose. And I said we chose then Next.js, which I think is quite broad. It catering, I think, almost the whole spectrum, but definitely more towards like the static part. And you have like server rendering as default now, but it's super easy to opt into client-side interactivity and that. And that will also, like now with Next.js 13, or when Next.js 13 came, now we are on 15 almost, and app router, that was even more pushed towards server-side rendering for Next.js applications, which is good for an e-commerce site, because we want to render the HTML that we can cache and serve in a fast manner to our customers. And one more thing before moving on, like we choose Next.js because it's sort of the boring choice in a way as well, or really safe choice. It would maybe be more exciting to choose like HTMX, Svelte, or some other interesting topic, or programming language, or whatever. But you also need to consider the sort of which pool of developers do you have? Do you have any group of people who wants to work in a different technology? Because like you can't enforce or force a new technology if you don't have the critical mass of developer interesting and wanted to invest in that technology. So that's sort of also why choosing Next was a safe bet for us, because almost all web developers know React by now, and Next.js is just a really opinionated way of writing React applications, both on the client and on the server. So let's talk a bit about what we learned. As I said, Next.js is very opinionated. So if you don't like the opinions of Next.js, go and pick something else. Like life is too short to work with something you don't like. I don't agree with everything in Next.js, but at least this gives me enough, or they thought about more things than I have thought about when it comes to web development, and I can definitely live with the things I don't agree with, because I understand them and can definitely appreciate the other things much more. And I haven't had any sort of things that prevented me of doing things, so I definitely think Next.js is a solid piece of technology to choose. And I don't like sort of reinventing things. I like to focus on what I think I should be solving now. And when I'm doing the e-commerce site, the focus should be on writing the e-commerce site. I don't want to focus on writing a build pipeline, or I don't want to focus on doing the infrastructure part. That should be solved for me. And that's sort of what I got for free when I'm using Next.js, and especially together with Vercel. And that makes me able to deliver value much faster. So let's talk a bit more about Edge runtime. Edge is sort of ambiguous, I think. It means a lot of things for many people. In the context of Vercel and X, it basically means having code run on sort of edge nodes close to your users. And that sounds really good because the distance is smaller, so the communication should be fast, right? And that's what we thought. And Vercel actually pushed this quite a lot when we started developing our site. So we went with it and went 100% on Edge for everything, which was not a great choice, to be honest. That's why we went to the Edge and back. And we started seeing, like, it worked fine when we were like 1 or 2 users browsing the site. All the metrics looks good. But soon we had more people consuming the site. We started seeing some latencies, and the metrics on the speed inside wasn't as good as we thought they would be. So that got us sort of thinking about, is Edge really the thing we should do? And I think it isn't. Because most of the time when you have this Edge, you have sort of the application running on Edge close to the client, which looks good in a way. But at the same time, you will have a much longer distance from that application to all the APIs or the database if you have that. And in our scenario, we have quite a lot of APIs to just render any page, basically. So that we get a really large penalty for running on the edge. So what we did was actually moving back to sort of serverless, which you can switch in Vercel. They have both edge and you can have serverless, which is basically a wrapping around AWS Lambda, I think. And so we made the move back to serverless, and that comes also with another advantage, because if you're on edge, you can't have static pages that you can't cache. So every page visit on edge is a full render of the application, which is good in one way, because you can do some amazing things around personalization if you render every single request. And it doesn't cost you too much, and it is quite fast if you have the data close to the edge node. But we didn't have that, so that's sort of why it failed. But instead, we now are on serverless. We can start generating pages that we can cache, and cache pages is something you can serve on CDN really fast. So that's sort of what gave us the performance. And we decided to move from edge to serverless like 1 or 2 days before we went from sort of 10% of traffic to 100%. And we managed to make the final switch like 1 or 2 hours before you turn the switch on to 100%. And we had a fixed time for that day because we were also starting a campaign on the same time. So it was interesting to see, like, could we handle the extra traffic that came that day? And we did. And performance has been sort of in the roof since day one with that move. So that's a great choice. Let's talk about routing in Next.js. That's one of the things that some doesn't like. I did not like routing in Next.js when I started doing it. I accepted it, but I came to like it more and more as time goes. Ideally, like when I started using Next.js, I was more used to defining routes in one file, for example, mainly for more like backend development, creating APIs. So that made more sense to me. But now they have a file-based thing, and some might comment, oh, how do I find the actual page for the specific route, etc., when all the files are named the same, which they are. You have like, only in this screen here, we have 5, 6, 7 page files. But in most IDEs, you can search for the file by entering the folder name instead of the page name. So it's quite easy to navigate the files when you get used to it. I haven't had any problems when after like a couple of minutes. The first couple of minutes were tough, but I got over it. And we have some different elements here. We have the folders defining the route or different route segments. We have a layout file which defines how things should look and feel, etc., on a high level. We'll come back to that. Then pages file are defining sort of the actual content on each page on that route. You have dynamic route, meaning if like order/ID, for example, you do that with a square brackets. Then you can put in either like one name of a parameter, and then that will be available to you in the page, or you can have like a ... beforehand to make sort of a catch-all route, which is also useful if you have try to have some SEO-friendly name of routes. You might need to have these catch-all things. We also have these route groups. You see it in the example here in the top, where the parenthesis account. That's a way of grouping sort of similar routes together, and that account part will not be part of the URL. It's just one way for you to group things that belong together. And then you can either sort of apply a common layout to those pages, or you can just use it for grouping purposes if you want to. If you have an underscore folder name, that will also not be part of the route. And that can also be good for then gather things like components and keep them close for your page if you want that. We are sort of mixing both, having sort of local components close to a page that are only used on a page, and then we have like a components folder in the root that are more common for all the pages. So I said a little bit about pages and layouts. My opinion, I think they have solved pages pretty well in Next. Make it super easy to create sort of sophisticated layouts. And they also have a concept called parallel routes that I won't be covering today. If you want to know more about it, you can catch me on the floor afterwards, and I can explain that as well. But layouts is where you define sort of how a group of pages should look like. So everything sort of below that layout in the folder structure will inherit that layout page. And you can also have sort of nested layouts, as you see here. Like you have the top page there, which have the gray box with an arrow, and that the other layout here will then actually put this context inside this larger box. And every page will then fill this space underneath this layout. And that can go on and on in the folder structure. So I have a super simple demo for it. So when I refresh the page here, you actually see it flashing can you see the green flash on the screen? I hope it's good enough contrast of what's loaded. And you have both like, Next is both SPA and an MPA, I would say. So both like a single page application and multi-page application once. When I do a full refresh of the page, I get the whole HTML for the whole page. But I also get client-side navigation out of the box with Vercel. So when I click the links here, I will only replace the part in the layout. So it has this whole shell quite stable all the time. So if I drill down to the other page, we'll actually see that only the inner layout is now replaced. And that makes a pretty good experience, in my opinion. We don't leverage this all the time on the Elkjøp site at the moment. We have more serving 100% static pages almost all the time. And that is also super fast in our case, because we don't have too much interactivity in that way. But if you're building sort of a back office application or anything like that, I think this should be super helpful. And we will probably explore this area even more for our e-commerce site as well. The page and layout. React Server Components. I think there's actually a talk about React Server Components only, so there's definitely going to be more to say and talk about React Server Components than I would be covering here. That was one of the probably newer things in the React ecosystem the last couple of years. And it's not like a next thing. They have one implementation. I think there will be sort of more implementation on the hood for how React Server Components work, but Next.js has its implementation. And it's sort of quite a simple concept that I think we have forgot about in a way when we're doing SPAs for 10 years, where everything is sort of rendered on the server, or on the client instead of on the server. React Server Components basically mean render the thing on the server and deliver the HTML, more like how the web was intended to be used from the beginning. And that will also give a better, most of the time it will be better performance for you because you're going to ship much less JavaScript. When you're using Next.js with App Router or the new App Router, which is not that new any longer, everything is a server component by default. And what that means is basically everything is going to be server rendered as default, and then you're going to ship HTML if you don't do anything else. There will, of course, be a slight overhead with JavaScript for the Next.js sort of framework, but except from that, everything else will be pure HTML if you don't do anything. So if you don't have any interactivity or anything on your page, everything here, as you see in the component tree I drew to the right, everything is considered to be a server component. And the way you are actually creating a client component is you are using sort of a directive in the top of a file saying use client. And that basically just means, or sort of marking a border saying, okay, in this file and onward, I'm going to have some interactivity. So I need to run on the server client as well. But that does not mean you're not running on the server. You will first have the initial render on the server and then hydrate on the client, as it's always been with React, I think, in doing things. So if we mark one thing as a client, then you would have like one client component, the green box here. And if that client component is using or instantiating other client components, they will also be made client components. So now I mark two other boxes blue because they sort of inherited the state from the component above. And the blue components, they doesn't have to have sort of use client at top, as long as the one above has it. Because they will know, or the runtime will know, okay, this is sort of a runtime context now. But this is not always what you want to achieve, to be honest, because this will maybe make you deliver more JavaScript to the client than you actually need to. So there are ways to actually achieving this in the tree, sort of. I don't know how to draw the arrows in a better way, but you can actually get a client component in the middle of the tree and then get the child to almost be server component again. And the way to do that is, instead of having the client component instantiating the component or the child components, you are passing them in from the server context. Then they will be already server-side rendered and you don't need to ship the extra JavaScript. A simple demo of how that can look. So here I have taken out like the most important part of it. I have this really weird component called server client, which I can quickly show it. It's here. So it will actually, if I can run use effect, then that means I am on the client. And if I can't, I'm on the server. So it will actually turn green when it is on the client, and red when it is green when it's on server, and red when it's on the client. So I have my page here in the code, and it has the server client. It's still green, meaning it still runs on the server. Then I have my client component with also instantiating a server client, as I call it here, and that's what you see here. That turned red in this scenario because it was instantiated from a client component, so it sort of inherited that it is in a client. But I'm also passing in like a server client, which also have a server client in it, and those are still green because they are still running on the server. And this is what you most of the time want to do when you're working with direct server components in Next.js. Because you want to, if it can run on the server, it is definitely beneficial for you to run on the server. You don't need to ship as much JavaScript, and it will be faster, it will render faster, and everything will be just nice and looking good. That was that. So internationalization, that's a super interesting topic, I think. And this is more about middleware, but we use middleware to solve internationalization. The problem was internationalization, and the solution in our case was using Next.js middleware. And when we started using App Router, there was no solution for this in the Next.js space, because App Router was quite new. I don't even think there is a good solution for it now either. I haven't looked because we haven't had a need to. Because there was a solution, but they were targeting the pages router, which was the router that was before the App Router in Next.js. And the way we went about this is, okay, we have this concept called middleware in Next.js. It runs before your application. And in the middleware, you can basically do anything you want with a request or the response. And it has the benefits that you can actually read cookies, headers, request parameters, etc., without impacting the application. If you do those things in an application, you would actually start turning the application dynamic. And that's something you want to avoid in a lot of scenarios, because if you turn the application dynamic, you won't be able to cache it in a CDN. So you want to keep the application as static as possible for as long as possible. But in the middleware, you can do it. So what we were doing, we want to solve like two things. I said we have sites in 4 countries, so we need to be able to decide language based on which market we're in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, or Norway. That's one side of it. Another part is when we are using Vercel, you get these nice preview deployments, but they are all sharing host names. But we wanted them to actually not have this like /no, /sc, etc. We wanted to look more like in production when we only have / and the path name. So we wanted to be able to both serve language based on a cookie or the host name. So what we are doing is actually in the middleware, we're checking which host name you're on, and then we are rewriting the actual URL for the application underneath. Might sound like magic, but it's quite easy. We can see in the demo pretty soon. So in the first version where we did this, we only had sort of the market, because we also have like the markets like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, but we also have if for B2B or B2C as well. And then that part actually grow. So we'll come back on the next slide as well. So if we're looking at this small demo I created here to show off how middleware works, I will show the URL because that makes sense here. Here you see my nice looking German site at the moment. But what's interesting here is if you look at the URL, I'm not sure if you can see that, it might be too small. It doesn't change no matter what I click here. So if I switch to Italy, it says ciao, I can refresh, it's still Italian, and that's going to be served statically. And what I'm doing here is basically first coming here and checking if I have sort of a language part to the URL, meaning like /no/sc or whatever. Then I'm going to set a cookie telling which language are you actually looking for. And then I'm redirecting to the path without the language part. And then I will, the next time I go here, I will get to this state and say that, okay, I have this language cookie. Then I can serve the site by rewriting the URL and inserting the language part back again. This way I can actually serve sort of static content without any big problems, to be honest. And it's going to be more interesting. I'm not going to show the code for the next part, but I can explain the part for the next feature I'm going to show. And then the part below here is actually just how you say when the middleware should run. Since I have many demos, I'm limiting this to only this path. And middleware is like one of the areas I think there are definitely room for improvements in Next.js. I would love to see them be more composable than they are today. It's quite a mess when you have many middlewares. They are better in many other frameworks, in my opinion. But yeah, you can solve it, and it's one thing you should try to master if you're doing it. And middleware is one of those things that actually always run on the edge if you are using Vercel, which is a good thing. So edge runtime is not only bad; it is a lot of good thing. For middleware, it's really good. And the next part, feature toggling, that still goes under middleware to some degree. At the shop, we are using Launch directly for feature toggling. You can actually go and talk to them down at the floor here. But I'm not going to show Launch directly. I will show how it sort of interact with Vercel and in a simpler way. And feature toggling is something I think everyone knows what feature toggling are, of course. But I really like how they have managed to embed feature toggling and testing in production in Vercel. So what I can do is actually, since I have this, if you haven't realized that now, the slide presentations is also a Next.js application. So I can turn on sort of the Vercel toolbar here, and here I get small feature flags. So I can start checking things from my own session here. So let's say I want to present in light mode. I don't think everything worked with that, but let's see. I can start testing features now directly sort of in production. So this is a way for us to actually ship things to production behind a feature flag, have our internal trial features out in a super nice way without impacting our customers. And that will definitely increase your flow of development because you don't have to wait for, oh, can we deploy this or not? Just put it behind a feature flag and get it out. Much safer. I don't think all the images work with black, so I will actually clear this, and I can turn on other things. And the way it actually works is on Vercel. I have this thing called edge config. Can maybe zoom in. Yeah, a bit. Edge config is, as the name implies, it's a config store running on edge, so it's super fast. I think it's a single-digit latency when you request data from it, especially on Vercel. And when you have launched directly, of course, you get much more data in edge config. But for a simple thing, you can start doing this yourself. That's quite easy. And then you only need to implement a small route that exposes your different flags. That's all the code I had to get this toolbar working. I don't go need this in detail because you get the sort of helpers from Vercel, both like the verify access and how the API data, etc. works. And this is something you can basically copy from the documentation, and it just works. The feature toggling, server actions, a lot of drama when that was released. I really don't understand all the drama. When they announce server actions, which is basically a way for you to talk to the server from the client in an easy way. And during the announcement, they did that by you sort of inlining the code for the server. And I think actually that was a stupid way of doing it because it looked weird. But that doesn't make it not useful. It's very useful. You don't have to write all the APIs or the backend for frontend, etc. if you do it. Instead, you can just use the functions you define on the server almost directly on the client in a type-safe way, if you're using TypeScript and not JavaScript. And that's definitely a really good way and convenient way of doing this. And you can do it both for like form submissions, but also you can hook it up to client-side events. And I can show a quick demo here. So I have this simple form here where I can post something. It will take 3 seconds because it goes down to the server, and then I get a notification, hello NDC. And this is only basic client-side, button clicked. And all this is actually going back to the server, responding back. So none of this sort of logic to doing that is on the client. And it's also quite easy to do. For the form demo, I have this handle submit function which call my action, and my action have this use server directive at top. And that sort of marked the border for like when you're compiling, like this thing is actually going to create sort of the connection from the server to the client for you. Then you don't need to create the APIs and anything. One thing that's important to know about if you do this is you still need to validate the data that comes to the server because it will be an endpoint to some degree under the hood. So you need to do validation, of course. You don't get rid of that magically, but you don't have to write a lot of plumbing. So let's go back to, for the form demo, we also have the client demo, which is as simple. I have this handle click, which calls the button click action from my client component, and that's how easy it is to actually getting the client and server to work together using server actions. And that's, I think, our preferred way when we are doing interaction, when we're implementing now. Back to the slides. Caching, another very interesting topic, I think. Caching comes in 2 flavors in Next.js. You have the page cache. I've mentioned it multiple times before. Whenever you're generating a page that will be HTML, you can be able to serve that from a CDN in a cached way, which will be super fast and a really good experience in most scenarios. But they also come with a data cache that you can use. And for Vercel, that's sort of baked in, but you can create your own caching providers if you want to. And there, when they come with Next.js 13, they had the default behavior where they're caching all the fetch requests you're making, which is not made ideal because you're sort of changing the behavior of fetch in Node. And they have sort of reverted back to that on Next.js 15. So if you are doing Next.js, could be good to know about. I think I like that they're going back because that we need to be more explicit on what we're going to cache. And when you have like the data cache and the server cache, it's sort of connected together. So if you have something like the page cache with like 1 hour revalidation time, meaning that's how long you want to cache it for, if that uses data that's only going to be cached for 1 minute, the revalidation time for the page will be 1 minute, because it doesn't make sense to store something 1 hour if the data is just going to be old after 1 minute. And also, if you sort of revalidate the page cache or data cache, that will also trigger a revalidating of the pages. So I think the caching part is something I like quite a lot. And I think they have done a great work when it comes to caching. And also have like a small demo of how that can work, because you can be sort of selective. I don't know exactly. I know it's going to be cat, so it should be safe. And I can revalidate this picture only. So now that's going to go, okay, let's put it twice. Yeah, so now I only revalidating that image. And the other sort of data cache with this picture is from other request, will not be affected when revalidating that. And I have like a 10-second revalidation time on this one, so I should probably get another one if yeah, so now I got another one after 10 seconds. And I can revalidate them both at the same time, and now I got 2 new cats in space. Yeah. Partial pre-rendering and streaming. I think this is one of the features not ready yet. They have a release candidate for Next.js 15, and partial pre-rendering is still in beta there. That's one of the things I actually thought was part of App Router when it was first announced, so I didn't understand that, and that's on me. But this is where we definitely want to go when we talk about the e-commerce site. Because when we have the part of pre-rendering, you can then serve a sort of a static shell of anything and then stream in dynamic content without making extra network requests. It will be the same request you're doing, so you're only doing one request, you're getting all the HTML, but it will be come at a later point. And that will also work without JavaScript or anything. To achieve the same thing without the streaming part, you would actually need to have JavaScript. And it's sort of like not 100% true. You need to have JavaScript to make the stream content visible. But if you're thinking from a crawler perspective, then you just want to have the content visible for the crawler, and that's perfectly fine to just stream it in and not visible for the eye. And so here you can have, like in this small picture, you can have like this black shell, and then you can like account button or whatever, and on pricing and maybe something else here, or if you like the image or whatnot, that can be streamed in later. And then you are much more free to sort of mix and match static and dynamic content in a much safer way. And I can give you, take listing pages, for example, on a product listing page on an e-commerce site. We can then have this static shell for everything around search, and then we can stream in every single filtered page we have. And that's something we can then create a much better user experience with. I have a really short demo here as well. So here you see something there saying, this is sort of static. It actually has like 2-second delay to do this thing here as well, but you don't see it because that's part of the static content. This part here is actually dynamic, so here you actually see it takes 2 seconds for it, and then it streams in. And you can do this with JavaScript today as well, with like using SVR or whatever. But the important part is still, this is the same request. I don't do one more request to get this sort of updated content. But there's some JavaScript to make it flash, etc., but it's still the same request. So let's talk about some Vercel features that I think is very... Vercel has definitely been one of the, if not the best sort of developer experience I have experienced when working with sort of cloud platforms. It's never been an easy tool to just write code and then hook up the Vercel to your Git repository, and you have like a deployment pipeline and preview builds, etc. So the development experience is definitely top grade when it comes to Vercel. So one of the main features that we have been using is the deployment features. Every single thing you're pushing to GitHub, we get its own deployment. It's not like you can see it was deployed and you build. You can actually go back in time and click any of these deployments and look at what did the page look like at that point in time. And that's very useful if you have some weird issue in production, and you can go back like 2 or 3 deployments and say, okay, do I have the same issue in this deployment? And it's super easy to like, you get this out of the box. And doing that yourself, that's something I actually did before we started rewriting the page. We did that for our internal site, or for the site on the old platform. But it takes quite a lot of time to get to this level of sophistication, I think. And in fact, for everything of these deployments, it has its own sort of caching space. You have the toolbar connected to that specific commit, which you can make comments on, etc. Next part is, of course, speed insight. Being an e-commerce site, this is actually very important for us. Having good SEO score is crucial, and one of the things we promised to deliver on, and I think we did. And one thing that could be hard to see in this picture here is like there are small annotations in this graph, light gray, and that indicates when you're done sort of production deployment. So if you see that your sort of scores start to go down, you can actually go in and see, okay, at which deployment did this start to happen? We haven't experienced that yet, but we know we can do it if that happens, which I think is very good. And you can also narrow down on things. If you see a specific route that is problematic, you can start filtering that, or a specific page or whatever, so to find where you might have problem. So trying to summarize, doing change in large organization, that's definitely hard. But it's doable. We just need to maybe change the way we communicate with the business and actually present the problem and try to speak the same language. And also to make this happen and also create a performant application, both the tech and the people you have on is very important. You also need to know the characteristics of the application you're building. Like, is it a static page or is it dynamic? Like, having a good answer to that will help you solve a lot of problems. And from my experience, Next.js helps me focusing on building the application. I don't need to focus on building build pipelines, Webpack, Vite, or whatever. I just mainly write the code and then print, commit, and push, and it's deployed. And that's how easy it should be. I really like to do all the other things as well, but it depends on the context. And the same goes for Vercel. It minimizes the work I need to do when it comes to infrastructure part. I get like automatic scaling out of the box. We haven't turn or change anything about the configuration in Vercel, but it still scales out of the box because it's run on a serverless infrastructure. So Vercel is definitely something I recommend. And with that, I would like to thank you all. And while you're thinking which color you should pick on the way out, it could be time for a question or two. Any questions? One up there.
How do you feel about the pricing? There's many people who's complaining about Vercel being very expensive, getting price huge bills.
Okay. Yeah. So the question was how I feel about the pricing. Good question. It's definitely a premium product for sure. I think the most people that complains about this has probably been startup who has sort of made it, and all of a sudden they see a lot of traffic. Will start cost a lot of money, and being a startup, that's sort of unfortunate to some degree. But they maybe should also revisit their pricing model or their value prop if they can't afford the extra customers. But there are definitely I think Vercel is also trying to make it easier to make things cheaper. You should do the right thing. Like if you can serve more static content, then it will be cheaper, etc. But it is definitely a premium product. So you have to consider it like what do you get for it. And in our case, I think the upside is bigger than the cost for it. But it's good to pay. But it's free to get started, and you can get a feeling for how it works. But for all the small companies, I think the pricing per user is sort of quite annoying, I think. But for like getting started, it's easy. But yeah. Another question? Yeah.
Some e-commerce websites, they use micro-frontend architecture.
Yeah.
Like IKEA. Have you considered that while thinking about this change?
Okay. Yeah, the question is like some e-commerce sites are using micro-frontends, right? And if we are consider that. We are also using micro-frontends in part of application, but that's mainly around my page area, where we have some components that we are also using in our in-store solution. So we're leveraging micro-frontends in some sense as well. But I actually try to push for taking more and more into the same project, just to simplify the overall infrastructure. But we probably have 1 or 2 or 3 micro-frontends as well. But I don't believe in the whole thing. That split the application in 1,000 pieces and then try to assemble it. I think it's better to try to gather it together. Any other questions?
How did you do search?
What say?
How did you do search?
Search. We are as of now we're using FactFinder, which is basically a search engine specializing on e-commerce, because we don't have to do more than just searching. We need to do something called merchandising, where we're actually ranking products and saying products we have campaigns on, etc. So just using something like Elasticsearch would be too simple. Another question? I have 30 seconds left.
What other frameworks did you consider before choosing?
Not that many, to be honest. And the reason was, as I said before, to drive some big change, you need to have some kind of critical mass of developers who want to work with something else. Otherwise, you will just work with almost against the developers as well. And in that sense, I think React and Next.js was quite a safe choice. I think that's all I had time for. So thank you.